Hello, everybody. My name is Susan Hawthorne, and along with Renata Klein, I'm the publisher at Spinifex Press. So, to begin with, I'd just like to respectfully acknowledge the wisdom of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their custodianship of the lands and waterways. The countries on which Spinifex Press offices are situated are Dewey, Bunurong and Wurundjeri, Wadawurrung, Bundangara and Noongar. We also acknowledge the many women throughout history who fought for women's freedom and the freedom of lesbians, often at the cost of their lives. So welcome everybody to the launch of this beautiful book by Suniti Namjoshi, Oh Sister Swallow. I'm going to introduce Lucy Sussex, who is going to launch the book, and then Suniti, and then we'll move on to Lucy speaking. Lucy is a New Zealand writer living in Australia. She has abiding interests in women's lives, history, and Australiana. Her writing includes anything from fairy penguins to horror and true crime. That's some combination, Lucy. In 2025, she published The Outrageous Fortunes, a co-written biography about 19th century crime writer Mary Fortune and her criminal son, George. It promises to be a very fine book. She's also the author of some terrific sci-fi stories and a contributor to both the very first anthology that Spinifex published, namely Angels of Power, and the most recent Spinifex anthology, It's All Connected. It's edited by Pauline Hopkins. Now, for Suniti, I've known Suniti for a very long time, and I've been reading her work since 1981. I discovered her first book with the date 1981 written in it. So clearly, I'm a bit of a fan. Suniti is internationally acclaimed. She is an important figure in contemporary literature in English. She's a writer of fables, poetry, satirical fiction, and children's fiction. She's published over 30 titles in India, Australia, Canada, and Britain. Suniti was born in Mumbai in 1941 and first wrote and published in India, then moved to Canada, and then to a small seaside village in the southwest of England with writer Gillian Frankston. In 2023, she was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, and her other books include from Spinifex, really right, Feminist Fables, Belgium, Suki, Aesop the Fox, Blue, and Other Stories. Now, I just want to make a quick mention of a couple of her books. One of which is the auto-mythography Belgium, an autobiographical myth, I'm sorry. And in the preface, Suniti writes, this account is autobiographical in that my experience is all I have. It's fictional since any version manipulates facts. And it's mythical because it's by making taboos that I make sense of all I have. Her other autobiographical book, Suki, is a biography of her cat and opens with, I want to write down everything I remember about Suki, not to immortalize her for myself. As with her other books, it's about relationship, dialogue, and figuring out the dynamics between people and especially between people and companion animals. Autobiography is therefore unreliable, but it's precisely this unreliability that makes reading Suniti such a joy. Oh Sister Swallow is an elegy for her sister Bharati, and that opens yet another universe, one inhabited by Suniti and Bharati. And I recommend all three books for you to read as a companion works in a way. And I'm just going to say one more thing before I hand over to Lucy, and I'll repeat this at the end. We have a special offer on OSIS for Swallow. If you spend over $50 on Suniti's books, there is a discount excluding freight costs. To get this, all you have to do is add Swallow 20 when you go to the checkout. So, Lucy, over to you to launch OSIS for Swallow. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Lucy Sussex. I'm calling from Naarm, which is what it was called before it was nicked, and I acknowledge all elders of the Wurundjeri people. And I wanted to start by saying I'll be talking about joy and grief, the experience of both, because this is very pertinent to Suniti's book. First, the joy of an author with a career. Suniti is published in this challenging publishing environment for over 40 years, finding voice to print, and that is quite amazing. And second, the joy of an enduring relationship between author and publisher. Here, Spinifex Books, a fruitful link for decades into double figures in terms of the books produced now. So we have joy and we have celebration as well of a new book child from this collaboration. And so, applause. And finally, the joy of birds, as in the title of this book, O Sister Swallow, because birds are joyous and the subject of this memoir loved them. Now to grief and the uses of. How do we process it? And in doing so, survive it. The subtitle of this book is an elegy, as is distinct from obituary, which is a summation of life often appearing in newspapers, and eulogy, which praises the dead, although the dead, like those living, are complicated. Elegy is a lament from the dead expressed in art, and it's a practice likely as old as our ancestors, the Neanderthals and the Denisovans. And some of us are related to both. I refer here to recent discoveries in the Indian subcontinent that people there can have both Denisovan and Neanderthal ancestry. I think I've got Neanderthal, but I'm not certain. Never mind, it's something to celebrate. And these days, a eulogy in art is relatively rare unless you're a poet, unlike biography, which is very common. And as a reviewer, which I was for 14 years, I've never actually reviewed one, which makes this launch a tad challenging. And so I go back to my first year university and I learn that there are 3 types of elegy: the pastoral, the impersonal, and the personal. So this is definitely a personal elegy. And I note also that there's a tendency for elegies to be by and by men, of famous men. And as with Dunbar's Lament for the Makers, but that's not applicable here. And also another thing of these other elegies is they're often about the afterlife. And this book is not. This is grounded in this material, richly experienced life. It's also about a life not striving to be great, an ordinary life, although all lives have something extraordinary about them. And too often, the ordinary life, so-called, has been unexamined, but they yield great riches when they are written about, as here. So this elegy to Bharati Namjoshi brings many elements of Suniti's artistic practice into play being an operative word when you're looking at Suniti's work. She uses verse and prose, realism and fabliau from various cultures. I note on the first page of the book, which is a poem about sparrows, but actually referencing an Anglo-Saxon, the Venerable Bede, from over 1,000 years ago. And Bharati Namjoshi lived between 1945 and 2021, and through illness and circumstance lived largely in the domestic world, in a conservative culture, often as an invalid, and yet managed an art practice of painting, I'm delighted to hear that she painted gods and birds. Without the ego tantrums of the bad boy artist, which is so privileged in certainly Western culture. She had the disability of a hole in her heart, not corrected until adulthood, and yet lived until old age. So the problems of writing about this life, and I want to quote here from an earlier poem by Suniti, which I find as a recent autobiographer very, very applicable to my practice and others' practices, called Deaf Eurydice. It's actually written for Suniti's famous cat, Suki, about which a book was written, also published by Spinifex. Sometimes the murmur of longing is so tentative and the thought of a caress so tangential that the senses strain to hear what, after all, cannot be said. And it's then that the temptation arises to write a lie on the water, scribblings on sand, or to the cry from the way the leaves moved and the light fell, what shadows portend. And O Sister Swallow is about sisters, one of the more difficult relations, as those of us who have sisters will know. Sisters and sisterhood are not necessarily the same thing. And these two sisters were completely different, one living in India and the other in Canada, India, and latterly in Devon. And they lived in environments that the other found inimical. They could not live in. So you had a stay-at-home and a traveller, a public versus private arts worker, a conformist and a rebel. But birds were for them a shared interest, even with different birds on the other side of the world. So in any relationship, there are things unexpressed, things that needed to be said that weren't, and death means that they will remain unspoken for the recipient, just as you think of telling them something they would have appreciated, such as being descended from Neanderthals, for instance. And then you realize you cannot delight them by that communication no longer. That is quite a step in the grief process. This book says many of these things, and in doing so, the reader enters into the lives of two sisters and sees them both as extraordinary. In chapter 5, some of these things are said, and Bharati replies, as imagined, as is true as the dialogues with the cat Suki in the book, Suki. A better world for Bharati is a paradise for birds, not such a bad utopia, all things considered. And in this book, Bharati recognizes her sister as devastated, as though she has lost half herself. She also says, we are closer after my death than we were before, and say things we never did. Of course, this is not a ghost story of fiction, but a memoir with fiction and fabulism elements, but it contains a good deal of psychological truth. So in this book, Suniti memorializes her sister most memorably, and on the last part of this book, she says, to remember, is that how one deals with grief? And on the evidence of this book, yes, definitely. And I want to return to this book's beginning, though a book's launch always, to me, puts in mind the launch of a ship, the idea of a dangling ribbon, a bottle of champagne to be smashed against the prow. Now, I once launched a book of vampire fictions with a bottle of blood red sparkling Burgundy. It was not smashed, but simply handed to the author to drink afterwards. And in the case, the ship in this book, as alluded to, is a beautiful pea green boat, well familiar from Lear, and for not an owl and a pussycat, but the sisters Namjoshi. So I would choose for them a green wine like elderflower or green ginger for a virtual smash as the book slides down the slipways into the sea. And so I commend this book, its makers, from author to publisher to the editors, and all who sail in it as readers. And all hail to the sailing ship O Sister Swallow and her journeys. So consider with all my best regards, this book launched.
Thank you very much, Lucy. So that's wonderful. Suniti, over to you now.
Thank you, Susan. Lucy, thank you so much for launching this book and finding the time to do it. If I thanked everyone at Spinifex, it would go on for a long time. Thank you to everyone at Spinifex for making it possible. I also, all right, I'll talk about the book first. How I came to write it. Minu, I can't call her Bharati, that was her name. She was always called Minu in the family. And I'm so glad to see so many friends here. Thank you so much for coming. It's easier to talk about us, especially because there are friends here. Minu died on the 2nd of November, 2021. And, but almost as soon as January, I think, I began writing it. I don't know why. Oh, exactly. It seemed to fall out of my head. It was extremely painful, but it more or less wrote itself. I think I missed her. I wanted to talk with her. That was one reason. Another reason, I think, may have been that all my life I felt that I was so close to her that I couldn't see her properly. And I wanted to see her properly for who she was. And I missed her. But when it was done, sometimes, as you know, Susan, and all the other poets here, sometimes a poem just falls out of your head and it's whole. And sometimes it needs a lot of work. This one was almost whole. All the imagery, everything seemed to fit together, but it was too short. And I would have had to put it with something else for it to be published or even to have a chance of publication. And I wanted it to stand alone. So I wrote to 5 friends and asked them if they would please read the manuscript and tell me just the answer to one question. What else would you have liked to know about Minu, about what happened? And they were so kind. They read it and they answered the question each according to her way of thinking about what else she might like to know. So my special thanks to Sandra Lello, who's here, to Ruth Venita, who I don't expect to be here because it's 4 o'clock in the morning in the States, to Moya Wolf, who's here. Moya, thank you. I know you just, forgive me for saying this if you don't want me to, but that you just lost a sister. It's kind of you to be here. To my thanks to Farah Mendelssohn, who says she can't be here, but she's busy organizing an SF conference or something, so I suppose I'll have to forgive her. And Julie, who I'm not sure, I didn't quite see her name, but I think she might be here. Hello, Julie, if you are. Thank you very much to them. Now I'll stop talking about how I came to write it, but you can ask me more afterwards if you'd like to. And read from it a little bit. This is so much easier, and I'm so grateful that there are so many friends here. More than anything else, I would like to read to friends. So thank you for being here. The first poem, the first passage I'd like to read is a prose poem called Snow White and Rose Green, which of course I never showed her when she was alive. It goes like this. Once upon a time, there were 2 sisters, and one got married and one didn't. Or, once upon a time, there were 2 piglets, and one went to market and one didn't. Or one was straight and one wasn't. The point is, whatever they did or failed to do, they were a great disappointment to their poor mother. Luckily for them, the 2 sisters loved one another. When they saw that their mother was growing more and more unhappy, they proposed to her that she cut them in half, and out of the two good halves, make one splendid one. Their mother refused in high indignation, but she was so wretched that the dutiful daughters went to a surgeon. The surgeon obligingly sawed them in half, then interchanged halves and stuck them together. But there were still two of them. This was a problem. So they went back home and said to their mother, "Now choose the good one." But their mother was furious that they had even thought of such a scheme. "You did it to mock me," she told them angrily. "You are both bad children." When the two sisters heard her say this, the good one wept, but the bad one smirked. Thank you. Now, I have a question about this one to ask of you, which I'll tell you now, but I'll repeat again in case you forget it by the time I'm through. And it's this, that is there something about being sisters that inevitably raises questions of sameness and difference? Because we have half the same genes, well, quite a lot of the same genes, and more or less the same upbringing, so there's sameness, and yet we're different individuals. And whether it's understanding this sameness and this difference, that is what we really want to do when we're dealing with other people, to understand that they're human, but also to respect that they're different. And it sounds like a contradiction because of language, but um, it's just the limitations of language. Anyway, that's the question. So something about the experience of being sisters. The second passage I'd like you to read is from a letter from my father, from our father, to our mother, that he wrote in September 1938, just before the war. He's in Karachi and he's writing to her in Pune. Minu was always asking me to tell her more about our father because he was a test pilot and he was killed when we were very, very little. But she thought I might remember more because I was 4 years older. So here I'm telling her about Dad. There's a letter from Dad, and he's very young. He's 21. My mother at the time was 18. There's a letter from Dad to our mother dated the 21st of September, 1938. He's 21. She's 18. He's impatient, impetuous, and very much in love. The impatient bit. Those damn mails are 72 hours late. It means that I won't have any news from you till tomorrow evening. Another passage is wondering, what do you think of the Central European situation? I'm certain there is going to be no war. How would you like my joining the reserve of Indian Air Force officers? I'm not anxious to spill my blood for the Britishers, but I would like to do it for the defense of India. Then he says, I have been here, I think that's Karachi at the time. I've been here since the 17th. It is as well that you're not waiting for me at the other end. Otherwise, I do not know how very restless I would be. But it is only a few days, and then there need be no waiting. Of course, I'll do my best to come over, but that was not what I was thinking of. I was picturing myself as an instructor, and you, my beloved, my companion for life. And in this passage, this next passage, he's ardent, demanding, teasing. What are you doing now? Are you writing to me? How is your little finger? Have you started to play tennis? Do you go riding? I mean to take it up seriously, for otherwise I will feel stupid or look stupid before you. The only thing you may beat me badly with would be your brains, but you so often forget them at home. And the last passage I'll read from the letter, and filled with a dream of a life together. How long does it take you to write a 3-page letter? This one took over 3 hours, for I was half dreaming and half awake. They're so young, almost children, and it breaks my heart as I, an old woman in her 80s, read and transcribe his letter. She outlived him by 65 years. He was 36 when his plane crashed. And I'm saying to Minu, less than half your age, or mine. And the question I have of you here is understanding that our parents were young once the beginning of forgiveness? And what are we forgiving them for? Being human? Minu lived to be 76, which is a good age considering that she'd been born with a hole in her heart. The hole was stitched up when she was 18 because then she was old enough for it to be stitched up, and also because the operation was available then. And also she had medical treatment, doctors looking after her all her life. And the last passage I'd like to read to you is a possible conversation we never had about feminism, but we might have had it. And if we'd had it, this is how it would have gone, I think. I say to Mino, I never tried to explain feminism to you because I thought you wouldn't understand, because I didn't want to put an additional burden on you by having you question the status quo. I'm not sure why, but I want to try now. Here's the proposition. We are women and we matter. I knew that. In a patriarchy, men rule and women come second. That isn't fair. Men are bigger and stronger. They may not be better, but they do things and have most of the power. Like me, you're a woman, so I'm not wary of you, and I'm not in awe of you. We're harmless. Well, not always. Does one have to be frightened to respect someone? Might isn't right. I tried to explain to M once. I call M his mother. So I'm saying to me, I tried to explain to her mother once. I tried to explain to M once that women were oppressed because of the imbalance of power. She declared that she was certainly not going to see herself as an oppressed woman. To which Mino says, what's wrong with that? I don't think I'm downtrodden. It's not a good self-image. Not everyone is privileged. To be oppressed isn't shameful. Doing the oppressing is. That's not how people see it. You sound cross. I want you to agree with me. Why? All right, don't agree. But don't you want to fight for your fellow women? I don't want to fight at all. Have you ever tried picking up a sword? They're heavy. I don't think even you could wield one. Look, being women doesn't mean being against men. Yes, it does. You want to deprive them of all their privileges. Nobody likes that. Besides, men protect us. Against whom do they protect us? Other men. Got you. Don't you see what that means? It means that as long as men exist, we need protection. It's hopeless trying to convert you. Minu says, I'll make a deal with you. Convert the men first, and when they're all feminists, I'll become one. Coward. Not a coward, just a realist. I dedicated feminist fables to you, in part. I said you were innocent and did not understand. And she says, why dedicate a book to me and then say I wouldn't understand it? So she has the last word. And my question here is, Have you had similar conversations with women in your family, or with women friends, and what's your experience of that? Now, uh, I hadn't realized that until it was mentioned by Susan that Suki was also an autobiographical book. So that would make no, a biographical book. But that's a very interesting slip, because perhaps biographies are autobiographies, because all you say is your own experience of the person you're writing about, or the creature. But if you want to know more about India and about what life is like, then the book you might like is Goza. For an overview of my work, The Fabulous Feminist is good. And if you like cats, then Suki is the one. Aesop the Fox is the one for those who are interested in fables. And if you care about climate change, then The Good-Hearted Gardeners. Lucy, if you're interested in science fiction as well, I'd be interested to know if you'd consider The Good-Hearted Gardeners science fiction. I think it might qualify. Now, there's a little time now for your responses and questions. I'll repeat the questions quickly so that they come back to mind, and see what you think. So, about sisters, is there something about being sisters that inevitably raises questions about sameness and difference? And what's your experience? The second question is understanding that our parents, to do with the second passage, my father's letter, is that our parents were young ones. Is that the beginning of forgiveness? And what are we forgiving them for? For being human? And the last questions, have you had similar conversations about feminism with family members, other women friends, anyone? And I'm waiting to hear what you have to say, please. And again, thank you.
Thank you, Suniti. If you would like to ask a question, the best way to do it is to go down to reactions, which is in the middle of the thing, and put your hand up. Thank you, Michelle, for being the person. I hope you've unmuted yourself. Michelle, would you like to speak?
Hello, and hello to Suniti, whom
Hi,
I
Michelle.
first met many, many years ago. And I have to start by saying that when I was a very, very young professor, Suniti was one of the delightful things about the faculty lounge. You know, the faculty lounge could be a pretty damn patriarchal place, couldn't it? But there was Suniti, and so it was all right. But you're right about sisters. I have one too. And I think that that business of sameness and difference, that it swings up and down like a pendulum, that there are moments in your life when you claim the sameness, that my sister and I claimed almost a twinness at one point, and then it swings away and you want to emphasize the differences. And then your life changes and you swing back together again. And I do hope that with my sister, who is a whole continent away at the moment, I do hope that we end by swinging back together. That would be lovely, but it isn't inevitable, you know, that there are always things, not always just practical things. But thank you for your long record of publication. My students were reading some of your feminist fables last week in class, and it is always a delight to bring you to them and them to you. Thank you.
Michelle, how good to say hello after such a long time. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Pauline, yours is the next raised hand, and please unmute yourself.
Hi, Suniti. I've got my microphone working now. I just wanted to say thank you for the pleasure of being allowed to work on your book. I've found it, I know this was said in the blurbs about it, how exquisite it was, but I found it truly exquisite. It almost moved me to tears. I found your writing so beautiful, and I am familiar with your work. I've read most of your stuff, but this one I don't know, was just in a class of its own for me, just very, very special. And I've got 3 sisters, so I thought I'd tell you that. And so I don't have any brothers. I've got 3 sisters, and the whole issue about similarity and difference has been with us our whole lives. We used to get called when we went to school, even though there's 1 year between me and my older sister, and then 4 years, and then 1 year between the last 2. And everyone got called by everyone's name. The teachers mixed us up all the time, even though we really don't look much like each other at all. We all got called by each other's names. And in some ways, we're more different than ever now, and in some ways we're more similar. So I've got a sister, talking about books, because as well as editing for Spinifex, I work in a bookshop. I've got one sister who's written chapters in books for in the environmental field, because she works for Parks Victoria. I've got another sister who's a playwright and had plays published, and another sister who is a book preserver at the State Library. So even though we're really different, sometimes we've got these similarities, and the similarity seems to be books. So I'm looking forward to getting them to read this and see what they make of it, because I think they'll all enjoy it. And if you had more than one sister, it's funny how at one period in time you're closer to this one and more distant from that one, and it changes over time. So, but I just found your book beautiful, and I just want to thank you so much for writing it. And now I'll shut up.
No, Pauline, I wanted to thank you especially for being such a painstaking and careful editor. Thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure.
Is anybody else going to raise their hand and unmute to answer a question or ask a question? Please do so.
Patricia's trying to, but she doesn't know to raise her hand as an icon. So, Patricia, do you want to unmute?
Just come in.
While she's trying to find out how to do it, there was one thing I wanted to show you that I forgot when I was talking about Minu. May I do that now? For those who haven't seen the book, I hope you can see this. This is a photograph of Minu. This is what she looked like. That's all.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Oh, Suniti. I'd like to address the sisters' question briefly too. I'm one of 4, 3 surviving. My older sister and I are 13 months apart. We are either side of the political spectrum. Feminism is not a word in her vocabulary, but we're as close as difference can make us. And I think that's due to the fact that we lost our mother when we were children and ended up in orphanages for a few years. So what we had was a shared history and a memory of our mother that our 2 little sisters, who were only 1 and 2 at the time, never had. Neither of them have a memory of their birth mother. And I think the orphanage experience really sort of solidified a lifelong connection that may not have been there otherwise. My mother was only 34 when she died of too many childbirths in too few years. But my older sister and I still see each other, visit each other almost weekly. There's nobody else in my life who shared what we shared as children. And so I think for me, difference in difference in politics, difference in our appreciation of women's place in the world is not unimportant, but that bonding of two children, 8 and 9, has the thing that has balanced difference. And it's done that through births, more births. She actually became the elder in our family when she was 41, after our father died of the faulty cancer gene. And I think, thinking back to losing a mother so young, I still remember her playfulness. And I think we do forgive our parents because as we grow older, because I think what happens is you realize you're doing some of the same things they did, and putting it into perspective, you think, oh yeah, okay, yes, all right, yes, been there, done that. And I'm dreaming about the reconnected sisters, and I can't work out whether my older sister would prefer to be the top half or the bottom half. You know, that cutting them in half and putting them back together. Not quite sure how we'd go. But thank you for a lovely reading and an honouring of your sister.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to speak up? If you don't, then
Sandra.
Sandra.
Sandra, yeah, you need to come off mute though.
I'd like to pick the playfulness that the last leader, because the elegy, I could consider it an elegy, is laced with humour. And that's a rare and a wonderful thing to have. So playfulness and wry and the funniness that is in grief. The other thing I'd like to say was that the awful phrase, insolence of death, which is the real dark mood. But there we are. But let's have the playfulness. Elegies with fry and humour is rare, as is the writer. Thank you very much, Suniti.
Thank you, Sandra. And I ought to tell you, all the rest of you, that Sandra and I are the nearest in geographical proximity. I'm closer to Sandra geographically than to anyone else. The rest of you are in Australia, in Europe, in New Zealand, possibly. God knows where, but not in Roosden, not just a mile or so away. So glad you made it, Sandra.
I loved it.
And thank you for reading that first copy, that first draft.
Debjani, did you want to speak?
Debjani.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you very much, Suniti, for sharing all that you have. It just all felt so very close to my heart. And thank you everyone else. Well, not only for your contributions, but thank you so much also, I feel, for sharing and supporting a fellow sister writer. And I think each of the 3 questions you gave us, Suniti, are profound and also are bound to evoke, I feel, very personal as well as universal answers. And I think they could keep us here all day. But let me just pick the first one, because like you, Suniti, I also had just, one younger sister, and a younger sister whom I lost too early, really. She was in her 30s when I lost her to cancer. The same cancer which, strangely enough, I too experienced, but at a much, much later age, and perhaps for that reason survived. But I just want to throw in one thing here. Yes, there was a lot we had in common, to the extent that perhaps because the age gap between us was very small. She was just a touch over 11 months my junior. So we were both born in November, and as children, we were always dressed alike by my mother, and so people often asked if we were twins, and we were, as far as characters went, we were very, very different. And we did have different interests as well. And my sister in childhood, she would just, always snap and say, no, we're not twins, not at all. And indeed we weren't, because although she was younger, she was always the stronger, physically, and I felt actually stronger in every other way. She was also, I always felt, much brighter, much cleverer, much more, much sweeter, much more generous. In every way, she was very, very different. Now, but we were extremely close. And when we were separated geographically, I mean, my father worked in the Foreign Service for India, and so the time came when we sisters could not be together because of our education. So she would be in India, I would be in Egypt, and then Morocco, and then later in the United Kingdom, where I'm now settled. But we would still continue our conversations. We would write to each other. And often, if we were not writing, I know that I would have long conversations with her in my head. And I imagine that she did the same. And after she passed away, those obviously, there was no more point in writing her letters, but the conversations carried on. And I don't know about you, Suniti, but I often found myself having those conversations on a daily basis as I looked in the mirror. So brushing my teeth or combing my hair, I would look in the mirror and I would feel that I was seeing my sister. So even though we were so different, and physically in appearance as well, I feel we were very different. And yet, as I looked in the mirror, I felt I could see so many similarities with her.
Thank you, everybody, for being part of this. I'm going to hand over now to Renata to just do our thanks for everybody who's been involved in this launch. So, Renata.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for these very interesting conversations. And I don't have any sisters. I don't have any brothers either. But so I feel like this is really new to me. I did have an awful lot of friends when I was a child, mostly girls. And but I know it's not the same. But I must say that when they left in the evening, I always thought it was really good they leave. and I'm by myself again, can read my book. That was quite early. Anyway, I want to thank very much Lucy Sussex for your very inspiring words at the beginning when you launched Suniti's book. That was really interesting, very good. And the word elegy is, of course, it's just a beautiful word as well as for the meaning that it entails, but it just by itself, it's a beautiful word. We should use it more often. Then my next very, very big thanks go to Suniti. Now, Suniti is not just that author, she's also a very dear friend, and we have worked on all these wonderful books together. And every time you write a new book, it is just pure joy. And thank you very much, Suniti, and I hope you will continue to write more books. And you mentioned at the beginning that you might find her other book, Gorja, interesting. And I really can tell you it is the most wonderful book, so please read it. But also The Good-Hearted Gardener, which came out last year, is also a very different book, but very up-to-date book with climate change and animals speaking, and also the animals in all of Suniti's work is just something that's very close to my heart. So thank you very much, Suniti. Then the next person to thank, especially in relation to this book, is really Pauline Hopkins, who did a fantastic job in editing Suniti's book, as she does, always a fantastic job. But I know that, Pauline, for you, this book was really very special. And I guess it has to do with you having 3 sisters as well. And thank you for all your incredible dedication to all our books and our work and whatever. Then the next person to thank is definitely Susan Hawthorne, who does all the things, especially behind the scenes, so that our books are not just sold in Australia, but also in the US and in the UK. And it's all very tedious work. And she is all the inspiration for all of us to keep going, because as you probably know, Spinifex has been here since 91. When, as Lucy said, she had a story in our first book, Angels of Power, and we haven't stopped since. We have now close to 300 books that we published, and we're really very proud of all of what we have done. We couldn't do it without our team. That includes Daniel Osborne, who's our I wanted to say new, but she's not that new anymore. She's been with us now for over a year, our general manager, and she dispatches the books to you when you order them, and please do order them. And then I've already mentioned Pauline, Caitlin Roper, who is Caitlin's phone still on the screen. She's our media manager and does a great job on X and on Facebook and Instagram. And then, of course, Rachel with an AE. Don't you ever forget that. Who is our marketing and promotions manager, because otherwise a dollar goes into the jar. But, it's not so bad, because Dashi, that was the dog you saw before, gets it at the end of the year. So Rachel is our promotions and marketing manager and all things techie that we can't handle. And she's also a big believer in Google Drive, and we could do a program on Google Drive one of these days. And Rachel and I could be combative on either side of Google Drive, but that's another story. And then I really don't want to leave out Deb Snipson, who is the designer who does most of the wonderful covers of our books. And this cover of Suniti's latest book is truly beautiful. It's just very, very nice, in case you haven't bought your copy yet. And similarly, inside the book is another really, it's an artist at work, and that's Helen Christie, who doesn't just typeset work. She really puts her all into designing our books. So we're very fortunate to work with such a wonderful team, without whom, as they say, we wouldn't achieve anything. We couldn't really publish any books. And so we're grateful that we have a great team. So thank you all for coming. Please spread the news about Suniti's new book, but also all her other books. And to order them, go to your bookshop and say you have to get this book in wherever you are in the world, or order them from the Spinifex website. And we look forward to seeing you on our next launch, which will be, we don't know yet, do we? Anyway, so thank you very much for coming, and wherever you are, have a very nice day or evening or mid of day. Thank you.
Thank you, Renata. So something just briefly to go over the special offer. What you have to do is if you order a copy of O Sister Swallow, you have to add Swallow 20 when you go to the checkout. It does end at the end of May, so you don't have that much longer to get it.
And it's over $50 as well, Susan.
yes,
So they
you
have
have
to
to
buy
go-
2 books.
You have to spend $12 at least in order to get the discount. So, you know, there are plenty of options there. And so thank you everybody for coming, for participating. Suniti, thank you. And Lucy, again, thank you very much for all your work. And Lucy, I hope you'll be able to share your speech on social media as well. That would be marvelous. So I'm going to have to end things in a moment. Thank you very much. Bye.